Hello, welcome to another Dragon Plus live stream. I am your host, as always, Bart Carroll, and with me every other week is my co-host, Jeremy Crawford.
Hello, everyone.
Lead rules designer of Dungeons & Dragons, lead designer of the Player's Handbook, and the game's managing editor. And joins us every other week to answer many of your questions. So welcome, Jeremy. Welcome back.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
We got just a couple bits of housekeeping for today. Yes, Roll20 Presents was off this morning due to illness that has been going around here as well as everyone else, it seems. So,
yes, it is like some plague demon snuck into our building and got everyone sick over the last 2 weeks.
So they will be back next week. That was just an unintended interruption, but stay tuned after Dragon Plus Today for Heroes of the Veil. Other things going on, we are going to be answering more of your questions today. I've got a big list that I scraped from the chat last time. So if you do have a question for Jeremy, please do put it in chat. Please do preface it with question, and our moderators are compiling them as we speak. We also have the first of our raffle open. Again, we mentioned this a bit at the beginning of the year. We appreciate you spending an hour of your afternoon with us. And so we wanted to say thank you with a couple of giveaways. Today we're giving out a pretty hefty D&D gift set, followed later on by a copy of the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of D&D.
Both of which are adorable.
They are. I was in a bookstore this weekend and in the kids section with my kid, and we were both watching as people would look at the ABCs of one, and we were both giggly and like, oh, that's ours. So Jeremy, you're back from a mini vacation, right?
It's true. So many of you might not know that Seattle got clobbered by a snowpocalypse. And I mean, of course, other parts of the country get way more snow than we do, but our city is not equipped for as much snow as we got.
Yes.
Plus, Seattle is extremely hilly. And so our cars, almost none of which are four-wheel drives, are skidding out, and people just abandon their vehicles as if, a zombie apocalypse has occurred.
That's what I had to do this weekend.
No, you even abandoned your car.
I had to fly out of all places. My mini vacation was not as nice. I had to go out to Chicago, and then on the way back on Sunday night, I made it almost all the way home and then ditched at the bottom of the streets.
Wow. So the snowpocalypse, the reason why I bring it up, because you ask, how was my trip?
Yes.
I managed to escape right as the snow hit, and then I did have to travel back while the snowpocalypse was still going, which was a challenge. I think I had 3 flights canceled on me. Yeah. Finally made it home, but where I went was Disneyland in California, one of my favorite places.
How was it?
I loved it. I always love going there. The sun did peak out on the second day. Part of the reason for going down there was to get a sunbreak, because it can be pretty gloomy here at this time of year.
Yes.
And we had a wonderful time as always. We even got a few glimpses of the new Star Wars land that's under construction, and they plan to open it later this year. And there were, as always, a bunch of changes throughout the park.
Yeah.
I've been going to Disneyland my entire life. Some periods of my life I've gone once a year. So I'm always very, very attuned to what did they change? Oh, this wall's a different color. This little village outside the castle is brand new. And I go on the rides, I see the shows, I watch the parades.
Is there a section of the park, I just wrote this down as a goof though, is there a section of the park that you could see converting into a D&D adventure scenario? And if so, how?
So I think the entire park could be the scene of an adventure, or you could carve it up into different adventure locations. Every time I go to Disneyland, I get D&D ideas, because if you pay attention on some of the rides, you'll see like, ooh, that's a good idea for a trap. Like if you go on the Indiana Jones ride, or you can go even on the rides in Fantasyland, which are supposedly for children. But if you pause for a moment and think about what is going on in this story, holy smokes, those stories are dark.
Yes.
Some of the darkest rides in the park, narrative-wise, if you pause and think about what is actually going on here. So again, some adventure ideas there. Probably my favorite ride, and has been my favorite ride since I was a little kid, when I think I was 4 years old the first time I went to Disneyland, is the Haunted Mansion.
Okay.
And
did you freak out when you were 4 years old?
No, I loved it. See, as a kid, and this is true today.
Yeah.
I have always loved Gothic horror. Now, as a kid, I was terrified by like gory horror movies.
Yes.
But if it was like Dracula or Frankenstein or the Wolfman or the Mummy, I loved it. Ghosts also I thought were neat.
Yeah.
But you know, Disneyland is so detailed that it rewards repeat visits, not only because of the things that they tweak, but also because there is so much rich detail worked into many of the rides. You can go on them again and again and again and again and notice new things each time. For instance, I've been going on the Haunted Mansion my entire life. This was the first time on any of my visits I noticed that in this big banquet hall that's on the ride, where there are ghosts streaming in and dancing and they're around a banquet table, I had never noticed until this visit that up in the chandelier, you'll see these two people sitting next to each other, and I realized it was Antony and Cleopatra. And I was looking up there, and it's like, those two are not a part of this period. And then we actually went on the ride again and started studying the ghosts in that room and realized that the ghosts are actually from a variety of time periods and have all gathered there in that chamber. Now, I have not seen that version of the ride in many years because usually we go in October, and during that time of year, the whole ride is changed, and it's a Nightmare Before Christmas ride.
Okay, for the Halloween season.
Yes.
I have to get down there this year. I want to get my kiddo down there. I think while he's young enough to still kind of buy into some of it, and he's old enough now to get on some of the rides as well. So we'll see.
I would recommend waiting until next year.
When Star Wars Land is open?
Yeah, but also letting Star Wars Land be open for 6 months or so, because I think it's going to be a nightmare during those first few months. By the way, not only those of you with kids, but also anyone looking for further adventure design inspiration, if you're at Disneyland, make sure to go out to Tom Sawyer's Island, which, if you haven't been on it in years, has been completely redone and has all sorts of undead pirates on it as animatronics, treasures you can manipulate, and there are things like you can touch that they have illusions associated with them. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I've seen how that story ends. The animatronics come to life, taking over.
That's right. When the AI takes over the world, its capital will be Disneyland.
I may have finished Westworld season 2 on the flight to Chicago. So I think in my head now. Hey, let's jump to some questions while we have Jeremy here with us this week. We've got several that you have asked from last time, and several new ones coming in as well. TK in the moderation has collected them for us, so thank you as always. I'm just going to jump to the one that I'm delighted by, as always. Not Halfwing asked last time, does a thrown projectile, such as a crossbow bolt from a monk's deflect missiles reaction, qualify for sneak attack damage if they also have multi-class levels in rogue? So the monk is going to parry the crossbow bolt, and he's also a rogue. Can he sneak attack damage with it?
So and I'm going to, as I always do, we're going to go
handy dandy.
I'm going on to D&D Beyond.
Yes.
We're going to look at deflect missiles. Okay, so first off, for anyone who doesn't remember about the function of sneak attack requires you to use either a ranged weapon or a finesse weapon. So that's the key. For something to work with sneak attack, it has to be a weapon of either of those types.
Okay.
And there are a variety of ranged weapons in the game, and then there's a subset of weapons in the game that have that special property called finesse. So again, sneak attack is very strict. The qualifying weapon must fall into one of those categories.
There's no folding chair sneak attack.
Right. Unless unless, again, the DM decides, and with the agreement of the group, that sneak attack works differently for their home game.
It's a heavy WWE homebrew.
Right, yeah, exactly. And honestly, if someone wants to get heavily invested in folding chair attacks, I would recommend maybe being a barbarian or a fighter. Rogue, probably not the best path to go down. Okay, so here's what deflect missiles in the Monk tells us. You can use your reaction to deflect or catch the missile when you are hit by a ranged weapon attack.
Okay.
When you do so, the damage you take is reduced, blah, blah, blah. If you reduce the damage to 0, you can catch the missile if it is small enough for you to hold in one hand and you have at least one hand free. If you catch it and spend one key point, you can make a ranged attack with the weapon or piece of ammunition you just caught. Okay, so here's the key. If the thing you just caught is itself a ranged weapon, then you can sneak attack with it.
Okay.
But if it is not, for instance, a piece of ammunition is not itself a ranged weapon. It's the ammunition for a ranged weapon.
Oh, interesting.
So that's the key, is if the thing you just caught
Yes.
is itself, according to the game, a ranged weapon, sneak attack away with it.
Yes.
Otherwise, or again, if it's a finesse weapon, you're good. Otherwise, doesn't qualify.
Okay.
This is, again, as if you're playing by how the rules are actually written. I often like to point out groups can make tweaks, either for your own fun. Maybe the way the rule works doesn't fit the group's sense of verisimilitude. Maybe they think, well, this thing should fit.
Or on the other end of the spectrum, the over-the-topism, the chandelier swinging style of gameplay.
Right. Now, what I always like to recommend when people start making tweaks, especially when something in the game has actually such strict requirements, because sneak attack is quite strict in what works with it and what doesn't, is you always want to be careful when you start undermining the strictness of those requirements. And not, this might surprise some of you, not because you're going to rapidly unbalance the game. You might, but that isn't my primary concern. My primary concern is when you start taking away the distinctiveness of something. You start taking away what makes it feel unlike other things. You actually start making the whole game feel a little bit sort of like mush. There is actually part of the sparkle of D&D is having things that shine in particular circumstances. If you get to a point where everything shines in every circumstance, the whole game starts to feel a little monotone. And so you actually want sometimes those restrictions so that then when the restricted thing does happen, it feels special, it feels exciting. In other words, if you have the exciting thing on all the time, it starts to become less exciting.
Right.
You start getting bored with it.
Yeah.
It's like, I started out loving mint chip ice cream.
Yeah.
But I just had mint chip 4 times today. By the 4th bowl, I'm still going to like it, but my excitement is going down.
You're always swinging from a chandelier. You bring
Right.
your own chandelier just so you could install it and swing from it. It loses the allure after a while.
And this is where role-playing game design has a narrative element to it. We're not only looking for balance whenever we make design decisions, but we are also concerned about the narrative cadence that the design creates. And we want there to be peaks and valleys. We want there to be times where that particular trick you just used, you're not going to be able to use it in this next scene. You're going to have to come up with something else.
Yes.
Because we don't want you to just have one button that you push over and over again. Again, not because that's going to break the game. No, it's actually something more serious than that. Because it might make the game boring. And the game being boring is actually far worse than the game being unbalanced.
Speaking of Star Wars, I still love the scene in Return of the Jedi where Luke tries to do his mind trick to Jabba, and Jabba's like, no.
Right.
That's not going to work. I know that worked on that other time. It's not going to work on me.
Yeah. And that created a moment of surprise and excitement.
Right.
That magic trick couldn't just be activated scene after scene after scene and basically resolve every problem.
The audience would never enjoy that.
Yeah.
So yes.
Now, if anyone is curious about the balance of something like sneak attack, I've sometimes been asked, why finesse weapons and ranged weapons? Why is it so strict? Part of it was when we were designing the Rogue, we actually were originally a bit more permissive in our early playtests with what weapons would work with sneak attack. But it was once we had nailed down the fundamentals of the classes, we then started doing our multi-class testing. And we realized that certain combinations with the Rogue, especially the Barbarian and the Fighter.
The Barbarian came to my mind immediately.
Yes, with especially two-handed weapons
Right.
and some versatile weapons. Then the numbers started really exceeding what we wanted out of the Rogue.
Yeah.
Because the Rogue is meant to be a impressive damage dealer, but the Rogue is definitely all about sudden peaks of exciting damage. But then if sneak attack isn't available, they kind of drop down to just kind of steady, respectable amount, but not the steady higher amount of the Fighter or the Barbarian. So we had to make sure that the Rogue, when multi-classing, wasn't suddenly outshining everybody else. And that's multi-class balancing is one of the trickiest things to do with classes, because suddenly you have this thing that was fantastic for the class on its own, but then you combo it with this thing from another class, and you're like, oh boy, the power just multiplied in all sorts of ways that you would not see within the class that feature was originally designed for.
Right. All right, we'll do a couple, one more at least from last time. We'll get into some of your questions coming in right now, and thank you again for the questions. Archmage Derek, and I think Archmage Derek is the one who asked about the Otto's Irresistible Dance last time, which was a wonderful, wonderful question. But now Archmage Derek asks
who I'm imagining, by the way, in a wizard tower somewhere, maybe sending these questions to us by owl.
Yeah, he is Archmage Derek.
Yes.
And he asks if a vindictive Archmage, we might call him Derek, uses the sleep spell on an unsuspecting guard at the top of a staircase. Does he wake up as he hits the first step or at the bottom, provided he is conscious at all at the end of the fall whatsoever? So I know there's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek in answer and question in this, but I think the underlying question, somewhat valid, is like, how much can I get away with as a caster casting sleep? Can I cast it at inappropriate times for the victim? They're going to fall off a ledge. They're going to fall down the stairs. When do they wake up here?
So let's take a look at the sleep spell. When you manage to knock someone unconscious with the sleep spell, the spell lets us know that that target is unconscious until the spell ends, meaning its duration expires, or the sleeper takes damage, or someone uses an action to shake or slap the sleeper awake. Now, by the technical wording of the spell, tumbling down a flight of stairs would not wake a person up from the sleep spell unless they took damage from that tumble, or the DM wanted to, in the moment, say that the tumbling down the stairs is equivalent to a person taking an action to shake the person. But by rules as written, again, unless that fall deals damage, it doesn't actually wake the person up.
You're in a deep enough sleep that the act of tumbling down the stairs isn't going to do it.
Right.
Getting damaged by the stairs would. And so as the dungeon master, you're going to make that determination when that happens.
And here's the thing, DMs. If you want to run the spell as written, you're good, do it. If you have players who said, now that's crazy, of course someone rolling down the stairs who's asleep would wake up. The thing always to remember when you are trying to essentially justify what's going on in the game world with a particular spell is remember it's magic. The sleep of the sleep spell is not mundane sleep. I know I certainly, if I was snoozing as I do in real life, if I took a tumble down the stairs, there's a good chance I would wake up. If I didn't, I hope someone would rush me to an emergency room. But again, we're not talking about the sleep of our world when it comes to the sleep spell. This is the kind of sleep that in fairy tales requires very specific things for the person to be awoken. You know, whether that's a story like Sleeping Beauty or Snow White, again, a call back to me just being at Disneyland, that sometimes magic creates things that defy our mundane expectations. So DM, don't worry about just running it as written, because again, you're not dealing with mundane sleep. Now, if a DM decides that you want to extrapolate certain adjudications from the wording of the spell, that's also fine. What I always like to remind people, though, is please, in your table, don't waste time arguing about whether the DM's in-the-moment ruling is somehow mysteriously an official part of the spell. I say this because I've seen people have arguments and they'll say, well, clearly the spell says any kind of shaking will wake the person up. No, the text of the spell does not say that. It says if a person takes an action to wake somebody up, they are awoken. Please waste no time arguing otherwise. But change the rules boldly and happily if you, DM, want to do so and the group agrees. That's the key. Yeah. It's basically, let's not pretend the text says something it doesn't. Let's just run the game we want to, be honest with each other about what we're doing, and then move forward and have a good time. But again, always remember with magic, it is supernatural. And honestly, when we're designing spells, we want them to feel weird, because we are talking about not just fire hurled and lightning shot, but we are talking about this strange and mysterious effects that you run into in folk tales, in mythology, in fantasy literature, in comic books. These things that defy all of our expectations for how reality is supposed to work.
I think I also liked that question in high school. A friend of mine insisted he was going to pass out at the top of a staircase, and we insisted that he not pass out right there for the same reason. So either cast by a sleep spell or too much, I think it was slow gen. We had a question from last time about monsters and spell lists, and I'm pulling this from the chat this week. It's a bit of a follow-up question about their spellcasting monsters, but few spellcasting monsters with counterspell in their prepared spell list. I know DMs are encouraged to switch out spells to suit their own taste, but I wonder if not including counterspell on most prepared spell lists, monster spell lists, was intentional. And to what degree does it affect encounter balance if it is added to a monster's prepared spells? So your thoughts on monsters with counterspells in their back pocket? So,
and this is an astute observation, person who asked this question. We do indeed refrain from including counterspell in most of our spellcasting monsters' spell lists. The reason is it is often, if it appears too often in the DM's hands, is, pardon me, going to be extremely annoying for the spellcasting players at the table. A player character countering a monster does not have the same gameplay feel as the DM monster countering the player character.
I'm laughing as a Magic the Gathering player, also dealing with the counterspell card or their likes, where it's like, I'm going to do this cool thing. No, you're not. It's like, it is beyond frustrating.
And this goes also back a little bit to what I was talking earlier about when I was talking about sneak attack, where we love there to be narrative variation in our game design. Once in a great while, we will release a monster that does have counterspell in its stat block, but when we do that, we want that to feel unusual and special. We want the group at that point to sit up and go, oh boy, this is dangerous, because we're having our high-level spells countered left and right by this foe. That should be scary. I don't want that as a designer. I don't want that to be the norm.
Right.
I don't want it to be the norm that player characters' resources are being nullified left and right. That should typically be the mark of like a legendary encounter, a very high-level wizard, that sort of thing. The other reason why, by the way, we do not include counterspell very often in our monster and NPC stat blocks is that it is extra mental work for the DM. You'll notice many of our monsters do not have any abilities that require reactions. Some of our monsters do, but we try to minimize that because we don't want DMs, in addition to managing all the monsters they're managing, having to constantly track on the player's turns opportunities to interrupt them. Again, it does happen. It's not a bad piece of design to do, but I'd encourage anyone doing your own monster design, don't overdo it. Yes, Counterspell is tempting, because especially if you've spent any time as a player, you know how powerful Counterspell can be. But sometimes what's great on a player character's character sheet doesn't play as well, narratively speaking, game flow speaking, on the monster side. There's also another little wrinkle, and that is, technically, if you run Counterspell as written, a player character casting it doesn't necessarily know what spell their foe is casting. Whereas the DM always knows what the player character is casting.
Right.
So there's also an actual difference in how the spell plays when it's in the hands of a player versus when it's in the hands of the DM. That is by design. DMs are meant to have all the information. That's not cheating for the DM. The DM is meant to know everything that's going on, because remember, the DM isn't just telling a story, adjudicating the game, but the DM's also making decisions that should always be aimed at the group's fun. And for the DM to do that, it is good for the DM to be equipped with as much information as possible. But that means we have to be careful as designers that we don't load the DM up with too many tools in the form of monster stat blocks, etc., that are just going to endlessly nullify what the player characters are doing. Does that make sense?
It does. And it sounds like with great DM's power comes great DM's responsibility.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. Sometimes people will get a little concerned about how often we emphasize that the DM is the final adjudicator of the rules.
Right.
But that must always be understood in the context of D&D is a co-op game,
Right.
and every decision the DM makes should be about the entire group's fun, including their own. The last thing you want is a DM not having fun, but then also the last thing a good DM wants is their players not having fun.
Right.
So the wise DM, while the one who's making the decisions isn't making decisions as a tyrant, they're making decisions as a friendly sort of master of ceremonies. That's what when I'm DMing, I often think of myself not as the person who's in charge. I'm just keeping the show going. I'm the MC. I want to make sure when a particular bit on stage has basically seen it's run its course. Time to bring on the next act. That the DM is there to just keep the action popping, keep the jokes coming, keep the scares coming if it's a horror game. And the decisions they make should always be driven toward that. What's going to bring the most delight?
I've found that for myself as well. It's an important lesson. I've been in a few games, especially earlier on, where there is more of a competitive aspect between the DM and player. It doesn't go well. And on my side, I leaned sometimes too far on the permissive side, which is also a point for dungeon masters to, again, be master of ceremonies. It's okay to challenge your players. It's okay to not always say yes, but see what they can come. They come up with great answers to dilemmas, so give them a dilemma.
And players want to be challenged. That's the thing. They want to get pushed right to the edge. They often want their characters' lives to feel like they're truly in danger. But they also love it when they escape at the very last minute. But here's the thing. They also love it if a beloved character maybe perishes, but does so in a way that feels like it counts, that it's an amazing heroic moment, or darkly funny. I mean, I've even seen some characters, they have these horrible deaths, but in the narrative, it's like, wow, this is some extreme dark humor. I've seen other groups relish the actual tears they shed over the death of one of the characters. So those are great moments, and it's up to the DM to help nudge the game toward those moments.
I've got a couple of questions from last time. I'm going to run them together here. They're a bit similar thematically. I'm not even going to try and pronounce XJXVX. Narratively, what is happening when a PC player character marks an enemy? Genghis Galahad asks similarly, what is Turn Undead actually doing story-wise? Are you making them turn and run? Are you turning them into something? So what's marking and what's turning from a narrative perspective?
So when it comes to marking, which is a concept that pops up in a few different features in the game, really the particular feature explains more or less what's going on. Really the main thing to think of is, like, on its own, the word mark has no game meaning in 5th edition. Mm-hmm. It basically just means I've designated that thing, that creature, what have you, for a purpose, to be the recipient of usually some unpleasant effect for it.
I've marked them with my sword and or arrow.
And then the feature, it says now what is the effect of that mark. So again, the word itself has no particular meaning, and if you as DM or player want to describe what's going on in the world, look at the description of the thing it is that you're using. A great example, Hunter's Mark. It's a ranger spell, the first line of which says, you choose a creature you can see within range and mystically mark it as your quarry. Until the spell ends, you deal an extra 1d6 damage to the target whenever you hit it, and you have advantage on any wisdom, perception, or wisdom survival check you make to find it. As a DM, given this description, I often describe there as sort of being depending on the particular ranger, I often will customize my descriptions to the personality of the ranger.
Yeah.
I might describe this as a greenish luminescence that sort of shimmers around the target that only the ranger sees. And I've described it other ways. Of the ranger sees like a spectral falcon, sort of harrying the target that even they don't see, but that this spectral friend is helping them along.
I like that.
I allow my imagination to sort of run wild as DM when it comes to describing spells, because our spells often allow you to come up with...
Here's what happens when we do this live. The lights went out.
Yes.
Fix this and be right back.
Our spells allow DMs and players to come up with all sorts of descriptions that really don't violate the rules and will just make your games richer.
Who didn't pay the power bill? No, we were...
Bart just slipped a quarter in the light machine.
We're doing this without a safety net this week.
Yeah, we don't have Pelham, everyone.
Pelham isn't here. Sean got us going, and then we're just, as far as I know, we're not even live streaming.
Yeah, there is no production crew here. We might be talking to ourselves, the ampersand dragon behind us, and the soundproofing on the walls.
So that was marking. Did we cover
Turn Undead? So turning is basically it just means you're turning them away. It's get away from me. The divine light or radiance of the Turn Undead ability drives them away. It does not mean you're turning them into something, although, heck, DM, if you wanted to describe the undead as their appearance altering in some way, as long as you are sticking with what's described in Turn Undead, go for it.
I had always heard it was in part maybe from old, I think they're called the Hammer horror movies, where you were showing your holy symbol, your crucifix in the movies, of course.
Right.
And the undead were literally turning away from that, and that was a bit of the feeling that it was meant to be conveyed.
Yeah, I mean, it is meant to evoke the classic, crucifix out and Dracula hissing away from it.
Right. Yes, turning under his cloak. Question from chat now. Does an anti-magic field prevent teleportation abilities that don't say they're magical? And the specific example given is the Way of the Shadow Monk's Shadow Step. Or is teleportation always magical?
So teleportation itself is not given a definition in the game. And so you have to look for individual teleportation effects to find out what they are, how they work. And even the word teleport, an English word, does not necessarily mean magic. Now, in our world, without a technological means of teleportation, it would be magical.
Right.
But technically, if an ability does not designate it as magical, you could technically use it within an anti-magic field.
You're folding space and time in some sort of pseudo-scientific way. And I'm reaching here for how it would not be magical to teleport. But.
So, yeah, I mean, again, by our experience, it would certainly be wondrous and magical.
Yes.
But when it comes to the rules, a thing is not magical unless it's actually designated as magical. Now, I mean, you rightly are like, but wait, Jeremy, it's pretty magical.
Right.
And that's why I've talked before about the fact that D&D is actually filled with wondrous things that we would consider to be magical that the rules kind of ignore the magic of. A beholder floating in the air, for instance. The rules don't consider that magical enough to register for most spells and other effects that turn off magical abilities, that kind of thing. The fact
thought about that.
Yeah, dragons, most if not all of their breath weapons, not designated as magical. Now, yes, in an English sense of the word, that is magical, but not to the rules. Even though that giant dinosaur-like thing is exhaling lightning, that is not affected by things in the game that interact with magic. You'll notice that most of the things in the game that counter magic, dispel it, turn it off in some way, suppress it, almost always is just dealing with spells and magic items. There are, of course, exceptions. There are features where, whether it's in a player character feature or in a monster, where it has specifically been designated as magical, where suddenly it puts it into play for things that might say, like, magical effects don't work here, or so-and-so has advantage on saving throws against magical effects. Well, suddenly this magical thing counts. But then there are other things that, again, while just in plain English terms, it is indeed a supernatural thing.
Right.
It gets to kind of skirt around the system, allowing certain beings in the D&D multiverse to pull things off that are truly wondrous and supernatural, even in places that might be subjected to anti-magic. And so the monk's shadow step is an example of this. A number of monsters have supernatural abilities that get around things like anti-magic fields as well.
I like the semantics of it. Magic is clearly a very rule-driven system in the game, but if you're using wondrous in a fantasy setting, I think that can definitely go a long way to explain how something is not following the rules of magic, but it's still magical.
Now, if those of you watching want more of a narrative hook for what I'm talking about, why is it that certain things that we would think of as magical are affected by some game effects, and then other wondrous things are not? Think of it this way. Spells, magic items, and again, those features and others that get sort of classified as magical, almost always what is special about them is they kind of represent magic codified in a particular way. We sometimes in D&D talk about magic being this weave, and that what the spellcaster does or the maker of a magic item is they take this raw magical energy and they turn it into a set of specific patterns. And so you can imagine that when something like an anti-magic field shuts that down, it's shutting the pattern down. The magic still exists in the multiverse, but it goes back to sort of its raw form. And so abilities like Shadow Step, you can imagine it that when a monk uses this ability, they are tapping into a kind of primal magic that has not been refined, that has not been crystallized into this codified way, and therefore it kind of it kind of almost like water-like flows around these things that are attempting to stop it. Whereas again, spells is like a code, and you can essentially put a bug into the code and stop it. But the beholder floating, there is no code. It's almost just like a force of nature, and it doesn't matter how many times you cast Dispel Magic on that beholder, it's not going to turn its hovering in the air off.
This had come in from Dan Dillon regarding teleportation effects. Does 5th edition still treat them as sort of planar travel through the astral in the designer's philosophy, or no? Is it?
No, we have specifically avoided making that kind of statement because we don't want every teleportation effect in the game to suddenly have to loop through planar mechanics. And so we have very simple teleportation abilities like Misty Step, a spell that many people enjoy using, that the spell does just what it says. There is no planar journey involved, but a DM could certainly overlay that as a narrative layer, as a way to describe what's going on when a person uses this ability. And I do that very thing often, especially in my home game, that when people use certain teleportation effects, given the nature of it, I will often give a very cosmic description of what's going on. And I tailor it to each teleportation effect. For instance, with Shadow Step, whenever I've described it, I imagine it as a DM. And again, so this is not the official D&D explanation for what's going on with Shadow Step. But when I put my Dungeon Master's hat on, what I imagine going on is that the person is actually slipping through the plane of shadow when they do it. And therefore, I will often use those moments as a chance to maybe describe something as an Easter egg or maybe as a future plot point that the monk sees as they're stepping through the plane of shadow.
Or something sees them. And
yes.
Ooh, what's going on here? I'll follow him back to the prime material plane.
Yeah. Now, I've been playing D&D since 1st edition, and so because of that, going back to Dan's question, I do usually imagine teleportation as some kind of planar jaunt,
right?
But we have not made that an official part of the game. That is a delightful narrative layer that can be a lot of fun for DMs to play with.
So going back to Star Wars, there's a bit of a hyperspace, but it depends on there's different spaces, and teleporting through Star Destroyers is another question entirely. Wolf Dragon Emperor asks, which is funny because I'm going to use this in an adventure coming up. Does the Ring of Mental Shielding, I think he meant the Ring of Mind Shielding, block a paladin's divine sensibility? If so, why?
Here, let's look it up. Ring of Mind Shielding. One of my favorite magic items as a DM, by the way. I have so many of my villains use the Ring of Mind Shielding.
That's what I'm about to use mine for.
Yes, and quite honestly, we designed this more for villains than for anybody else. All right.
It's a necessary thing sometimes. I have such suspicious players. Any NPC they're going to meet is going to be suspicious anyways. So having at least something where they can fool their detection abilities.
All right, and so the question is, does it block a paladin's divine sense? Okay, so first, Ring of Mind Shielding says, while wearing this ring, and it does require attunement, you are immune to magic that allows other creatures to read your thoughts, determine whether you are lying, know your alignment, or know your creature type. All right, so now let's take a look at the paladin's divine sense. And oh boy, in my horror campaign right now, does divine sense get a ton of use.
I can only imagine.
Oh God, I don't think a session goes by without divine sense being used several times. All right, here's divine sense. As an action, you can open your awareness to detect these forces described in the previous sentence. Until the end of your next turn, you know the location of any celestial, fiend, or undead within 60 feet of you that is not behind total cover. You know the type, celestial, fiend, or undead, of any being whose presence you sense, but not its identity. Now, here is the thing. This ability is not called magical. And
So going back to our theme of wondrous, if not magical.
Yes.
Or supernatural, I suppose, in this case.
whereas the Ring of Mind Shielding says you are immune to magic that allows other creatures to, do these things. So, technically speaking, the Ring of Mind Shielding is of no use against the Paladin's divine sense.
They're just too intuitive.
Yes. Yep.
There you go. And that's also good knowledge as a DM who's trying to pull this very trick off.
Yep.
It looks like the 2 raffles have closed, so congratulations to our winners of the D&D gift set and the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. We will continue to run some more of those in each Dragon Plus live stream. We've got about 12 minutes left, so we've got time for a few more questions yet. I'll try and take a few from previous, just so those don't get lost to the archives, and a couple from the live chat today. And again, the questions that you ask also don't get lost to the ether. We do collect them every week and have a big list that we go through. Let's see. Ben74 asks, if you jump and finish your movement mid-air, do you continue where you left off on your next turn, assuming you can jump farther than your movement, or do you fall immediately?
You fall.
Yeah, the Looney Tunes style of Wile E. Coyote, like, well, it's not my turn yet, I'm not falling yet.
Now, I do, what you can do is you can dash on your turn and try to make an extra long jump, and you can put 2 moves together essentially to jump very far. But yeah, once your turn ends, unless you have something that's allowing you to levitate or hover there or fly, down you go.
I like that. Yeah, you haven't fallen yet until it's your turn again. Like, well, maybe not. If someone true polymorphs a creature into an object, such as a massive diamond that can be used as a material component, what happens if you try to use the object as a consumable component? I think this has come up in their game before. Does the spell attempt to consume the creature, then fail when the creature transforms back at 0 hit points?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I love True Polymorph. I say that with only a slight bit of sarcasm. There are some things as a designer that we have in the game because they've always been in the game. Yes. All right, so you can turn a creature into a non-magical object. And now we look down into object into creature. Let's see. The transformation lasts for the duration or until the target drops to 0 hit points or dies.
Okay.
All right, so if you turn a creature into an object, it transforms along with whatever it is wearing and carrying into that form, as long as the object's size is no larger than the creature's size. Creature's statistics become those of the object, and the creature has no memory of time spent in this form after the spell ends, and it returns to its normal form. Again, the spell ends, meaning the transformation ends, if the target drops to 0 hit points or dies.
So I transform somebody into a diamond. I'm going to use that said diamond in a ritual or spell. It's consumed. Does that mean the creature dies and then does the spell fizzle? What happens here?
So to answer the first part of the question, you can use that person as a material component.
Okay.
Because they are now an object.
They are. You are a peanut butter sandwich.
Right. But the spell doesn't specify what happens when a thing is consumed.
Right.
So I would leave it to the DM to decide whether the person reappears dead or at 0 hit points. But the key is they would reappear because suddenly the object is boof, and so then here comes the person.
I'm laughing because in our ongoing list of spells we're going to recreate based on these conversations, one of them is now going to be called Corner Case. You cast it at 2 targets, and they must debate the finer points of a ruling. Meanwhile, you're free to scamper past them unnoticed.
And of course, the implied by the question was this idea is, as soon as the person turns back, does that foil the spell that was using the person as object as a material component? But here's the thing. The spell only requires that the thing be consumed. And so once it's consumed, the spell happens. And then the DM has to decide where does the person come tumbling out.
Right. Are they integrated in the spell effect in some weird and horrific way? How does that work? Do they come back as a person who's also a diamond person? I would have a lot of fun with this as a dungeon master, so by all means, go ahead and try it.
My inclination as a DM would be that they would come back dead.
Yes.
Because essentially, when a spell consumes something, it is essentially disintegrating it.
Right.
And so the person would come back dead. Now, someone listening to me might think, good grief, Jeremy, that is awfully powerful. Keep in mind, this is a 9th level spell. We have plenty of spells at 9th level that can easily kill people. So going through these hoops to kill a person, that is totally within bounds for a 9th level spell.
It seems oddly, gruesomely poetic, maybe if you're doing away with the final baddie in some way. But
I want to see the story where some arch villain slays a beloved character to the party. They then true polymorph that guy, and this sort of supreme cosmic justice use the diamond that guy now is to resurrect the friend that he killed.
Well played.
Yes. That's what I would do.
Oh, folks, we're about 5 minutes to the top of the hour. I'm going to save maybe a fast question here for the last couple minutes before we go off to Heroes of the Veil.
I like that one.
All right. Really quickly, again, thanks to everyone for spending an hour with us, followers, subscribers, and moderators included, of course. Let's talk to Saint Void. This was, can you explain the thoughts? Was this the one? Can you explain the thoughts behind the change of healing spells from conjuration to evocation and why they aren't considered part of necromancy?
I like this question because it has to do with the history of the game. And I love talking about the evolution of D&D's rules over its many editions. So this question it has to do with the school of magic that many healing spells have. In 5th edition, many healing spells belong to the evocation school. Now this question asks, well, why did that change from conjuration? So here's a little bit of D&D history. In 3rd edition, many healing spells were conjuration. But what many people don't realize is 3rd edition actually changed it from what was traditional in 1st and 2nd edition, in which many healing spells were necromancies, some were alterations, and if I remember correctly, there might have been even 1 or 2 that were invocations, because 1st edition had both invocations and evocations. So there has not been consistency on this point throughout the life of the game. What we decided when assigning schools of magic in 5th edition is that whatever the healing spells ended up as, conjuration really didn't make a whole lot of sense, because as the game has evolved, conjuration has become very much the school of magic for things that not only conjure something to you, but also conjure you someplace else in the form of teleportation and whatnot.
You're not conjuring bandages.
Right. And so we considered necromancy, because actually, again, some healing spells in 1st edition were necromancies, but also as the game has evolved, necromancy has become very much the the domain of death.
Right.
That is the school all about death magic or foiling death. So that's why you also have resurrection magic belonging to the necromancy school. And so we thought a lot of baseline healing, whenever it's been described in D&D, has really been described as sort of positive energy being deployed directly to ease a person's hurts. And so we thought the best place for that, given our descriptions of the schools, was evocation, because the evocation school is all about just harnessing raw magical energy and creating some effect with that energy. We also did it because we kind of liked this, this sort of two sides of the same coin thing that we now have in evocation, where it is the school of both raw damage and raw healing. And so there you have it. That's why we made that choice. And again, it is something that has changed throughout the game's history.
All right, well, there you go. And we've done it right before the top of the hour and Heroes of the Veil coming up at 2 p.m. So again, thanks everyone for joining us for the Dragon Plus live stream. I saw this asked in chat before we went live. Dragon Plus, the next issue itself, will be coming out next week. We wanted to time it with other things as well. So look for that to hit iOS, Android, and at dragonmag.com. As always, very early next week. We're putting the final touches on that now. Jeremy will be back with us hopefully in 2 weeks' time.
Can I say one more thing?
No, yeah. Of course you can.
Simply because I know people have been wondering about the Artificer. You know, we said that it is targeted for February. We are still on track for February, but because of the snowpocalypse and the plague demon that has been tearing through our department, it is a very good chance that it will be coming out on like the last day of the month. So it is on its way. I'm looking forward to seeing it out there and getting all of your feedback. Also, I've received some questions of, is our plan still to release Unearthed Arcana on the second Monday of each month? We are actually going forward planning to be a bit more flexible about when we release Unearthed Arcana because we more and more want to tie it to playtesting of things in future books. And sometimes an extra week or two will allow us to get something into the shape it needs to be to get the best feedback possible. So Unearthed Arcana is still definitely ahead of us in the year ahead, but it's going to be coming out at various times in the coming months.
So true or false, you've decided to rename it the Bartificer. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.